have a conundrum. On the one hand, I don't think the New York Times or Poetry Magazine or any of these, they call them dinosaur media, and I think that's a great term for it. Legacy art media, we'll call that legacy cultural institutions. They don't, the age of the internet completely blew their gatekeeping function apart.
Because a lot of the cultural critics and commentators who, yeah, believe in some kind of, you could call it aristocratic or high culture, which in the Platonic sense just means excellence, right? So excellence in poetry, in the arts.
And Jacob, as much as he's kind of sneaky and a deceiver, he seems to be genuinely seeking an encounter with God. The purpose God eventually chose him for was on earth.
Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the New Lyre podcast. I'm your host, David Goslin, and I'm here with some of our contributors from the latest issue of New Lyre Magazine. And we're going to be delving a bit deeper into our latest spring-summer offering and riffing a bit on the state of culture, which is evolving. You know, we're in summer now. I imagine some people are on vacation, some people are feeling the summer vibes, so it's not a bad time to pick up a book of poetry and reflect a little bit if there is that time. I know I was doing that. I was reading Keats's Pot of Basil, of all poems, on a street corner a day or so ago. I have all sorts of people that I know. They're like, "Hey, I saw you on your bike, like on the side of the street or something." I'm kind of zipping around all the time, and I'll stop and read and take notes, keep going. So yeah, I know you guys have been busy. Everyone has been fairly productive in literary terms. So how are you guys?
Doing well, doing well. It's
Good.
good to be back, and good to meet you, Jesse, and
Yeah,
good to
likewise.
meet you again, Adam.
So
Good to see you. Good to meet you.
so Jesse is in Ottawa, so he's a fellow Canadian poet and writer. Always nice. I had the opportunity to meet Jesse in person briefly. I brought him a copy of the issue, and I briefly met his family. They're all blonde kids, blonde wife. I'm jealous. They got nice blonde hair. So yeah, good job,
I'm
Jesse.
jealous too.
Yeah. And then we got Adam, our a stalwart contributor. Welcome back, Adam.
Good to be back.
So yeah, I was thinking about, there are many different ways we could start off our discussion, but what stood out recently, I was just scrolling on Twitter at some point, and my feed gave me something from the account of David Perel, who has the Writing Life podcast. He interviews all sorts of writers, and he retweeted a comment that was made under one of his recent videos, and he just wrote, when a YouTube commenter comes out of nowhere and absolutely nails it. And here's the comment, and people can chime in after. The commenter says, but just take a look at the art section in the New York Times and compare it to 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. You'll notice that various elements of what used to be referred to as high culture have successively disappeared. Most of it is now about products of the entertainment industry. I hate to use the word intellectualism, but there was a time when middlebrow thinking wasn't the upper limit of cultural aspirations, when the word elite wasn't a pejorative and didn't have anything to do with power or money. I see a world of ruthless conformity. People don't even know what they're missing, though they do know that they're missing something. And that's the problem. I ended up just tweeting back at the person. We actually have a Journal of High Culture. It literally says Journal of High Culture, so it's not like I'm making it up. We publish original classical poetry, historical deep dives, criticism, and translations. The problem is people want high culture, but then they're always looking to the gatekeepers or some elite institution to provide it. So that was my clapback. And I think it's appropriate because a lot of the cultural critics and commentators who, yeah, believe in some kind of, you could call it aristocratic or high culture, which in the Platonic sense just means excellence, right? So excellence in poetry, in the arts. But then there's often this fetish for institutions and that it's supposed to come from particular places and certain establishments with these nice rosy reputations. But then when I think historically, that's never usually how it happens. So all that to say, I think there's a bit of a bind. People want high culture, but then are they really looking at the right places? uh, Oftentimes they want it to be sort of stamped with some kind of by some status institution. And yeah, I see that that's a big problem. So, we are not gatekeepers, and we've consistently put out good stuff. And I see a lot of good stuff, but it's just not why are people still looking to the New York Times? Why are people still reading the New York Times? Right? Why are they looking to these places for culture? That's my rant.
Especially, I think where poetry is concerned, it's narrowed down terribly. What's the gatekeepers, Paris Review, New York Times. I have a friend who's, in terms of knowledge, he's the equivalent of a PhD in Shakespearean studies. He's a very good poet. And he had, I think it was the Atlantic or someone, what's considered a top market, rejected one of his submissions. They kind of sniffed basically, well, as a rule, we don't accept rhyming poetry. Like, who decided that? There's fine examples of, judge the work on its own merits. Why must it? Who decided that? And I think, I don't know, maybe it has to get a certain number of, and then a certain number of likes.
Yeah.
If that determines what you read, you're in trouble right there. So.
Well, you kind of have a conundrum. On the one hand, I don't think the New York Times or Poetry Magazine or any of these, they call them dinosaur media, and I think that's a great term for it. Legacy art media, we'll call that legacy cultural institutions. The age of the internet completely blew their gatekeeping function apart, and I don't think they've learned how to cope with it. And I think the good and the bad thing is we don't have these cultural institutions that we used to look towards. Now, I think you can make a case, and I certainly would, that they've grown decadent and corrupt and set in their ways without being open to changes in aesthetics or viewpoints over the years, and that's part of why they've ossified and they've gone by the wayside. On the other hand, it's the Wild West, which on one hand is exciting. It allows publications like this, like all the online publications, to finally have a voice. But there's nowhere to look. Someone who doesn't know, who wants to dip their toe into poetry at the beginning, is confronted with this avalanche of just media sites, and they have to wade through it. So it's an exciting time to be alive, and like any period of change, there's good and bad. That's kind of my read on the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean there's a lot that could be said, but overall, yeah, I mean, what are some of the outlets, by the way, that you folks do find are doing some good things these days? I mean, that's always useful, right? Jesse, you won a nice award from Dappled Things. They have cool stuff. I've poked
Yeah, that's a
around.
great
I
journal.
could keep poking around, but that's one that stands out as interesting.
A new one I'm really excited about is New Verse Review. I
Right.
don't know if you've seen that one yet, but it's
Yeah, we interviewed
You had the hosting.
oh right, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
Stephen.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
no,
have
they're
have
cool.
Steve on. Yeah,
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 they're
yeah,
cool. Shout out.
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's true. So it's a double-edged sword because we are in the Wild West. So you got a lot of everything. And but all the more, I mean, that's why a lot of our time now has gone into actually creating the infrastructure, the platform, the and the media that kind of can go up against some of these bigger institutions like the New York Times. I mean, the good thing about these guys is they have the resources, right? Like you can have a podcast, you can put out a document. They have the people, right? They have the sound, they have the this, they have the editors. So when you're a smaller outlet and you have to wear all those hats, and you don't have like a giant, production team, there are a lot of hoops to jump through. So I think that's like the bottleneck, and that's why yeah, I think a lot of the independent journals, we have a lot of tools now. There's a lot we can do to disseminate work and introduce it in new ways. Like we just put out our first documentary, and it ends with Schiller's poem. But we're going to do the same. We have a new one coming out for the anniversary of Woodstock called the Devil at Woodstock. And we're going to adapt Daniel Leach's poem, one of our contributors, The Devil at Woodstock, into
the devil and Daniel Leach.
Yeah, we're going to adapt it into a sort of historical deep dive into the emergence of the counterculture, and kind of zooming out and understanding what happened, how did we get here, and then sort of end with the poem as such, informed by all this historical context. But the poem on its own works as a good history lesson, arguably like many poems, right? It sort of captures history better than you can if you were to write, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon or something, like Shakespeare. So you could argue that Julius Caesar or Coriolanus, these plays capture a lot of the tragedy and historical truth of something like the Roman Empire in a way that, Gibbon couldn't really achieve with a giant tome. But that's lawful, right? That's not because Gibbon was a bad writer, but poetry is able to condense and has a sort of least action pathway when it comes to distilling truth. So yeah, so we are going to put that out. And I mean, I think that's the next step for a lot of publications is just, you got these big boys that have the capacity, but they're just not doing the things that they should. And so we have to fill that gap. And that's why it's good to have talented contributors like you guys. So, I mean, we could say all sorts of things. You guys can feel free to chime in, but we could maybe start by introducing one of the poems that from the latest issue. Jesse, you're new on the podcast, so we actually we'll pick on you. And yeah, we have a great poem to start off with. I mean, we'll start off with a bang then. You have your poem here, which originally was published by Darkly Bright Press, called The Villanelle of the Elect. But I thought it was so good that we should feature it, and it worked perfectly with the theme. And it was also an opportunity for readers to discover your work and your latest book of poetry. So maybe tell us a bit about that, your poetry journey, and then we can read that poem, chat a bit about the themes, and go from there.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, David. Really nice to be here. So yeah, I've been writing poetry my whole life, but writing it seriously since 2020. It was how I dealt with the COVID times, like many people. I discovered Darkly Bright Press and started sending them poems. This one was first published through that context, and then I started sending poems other places and started getting published in a bunch of different venues. Darkly Bright Press eventually put my book out. Book here, The Living Law, and yeah, working on a second book now. Yeah. So you want to talk about the poem itself?
Yeah, I mean, here, why don't you read us one of your poems? So this is featured in your recent collection, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, read it to us, and just make sure bear in mind for the audience, give it a slow read,
Hmm.
and so yeah, will be a people we publish it. We'll link to the actual text as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, feel free to introduce this poem, and there we
Yeah.
go.
Okay, this is Villanelle of the Elect. So Jacob was loved and Esau was hated. It seems like a bit of an uneven deal. You won't stop creating this world you've created. If Esau had hope, it was quickly deflated. The subtle supplanter had him by the heel. But Jacob was loved and Esau was hated. Outside of the city, with heaven ungated and rungs reaching down, Jacob glimpsed what was real. You still were creating this world you'd created. Poor Esau found Jacob's thin soup overrated when robbed of his birthright for one meatless meal. Yet Jacob was loved and Esau was hated. You grappled with Jacob. He grunted and grated while you danced, delighted to meet with such zeal as you kept creating this world you'd created. There's purpose in life, but the path isn't fated. You unspool these urgings we don't even feel. And Jacob was loved, and Esau was hated. You keep on creating this world you've created.
Hmm. A fascinating poem about a rather enigmatic story from the Old Testament. After reading your poem, Jesse, I was like, okay, I need to, take a bit of time here. I want to look into the story more, read the original, and get a few people's takes on it. And even then, I mean, you see even the official sort of narrative, whether it's the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church or whoever, it's always a bit like, okay, that's the reading, but the story itself is feels like you could go in all sorts of places with it. And so, yeah, maybe say something about it. I mean, and maybe first, what is it for our audience? What is the
Yeah.
story of Jacob and Esau?
Yeah. For those who aren't raised Baptist like me and had the Bible drilled into them, so Jacob was the grandson of Abraham who received the promise from the Hebrew God that he would inherit the land he was sojourning in, and that all nations would be blessed through his progeny, right? So then that promise was passed on to his son Isaac, and then Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. They were twins, born at the same time. Esau came out first, but Jacob was holding him by the heel when they tumbled out. So Esau, having come out first, had the right of being the firstborn, but he's this really impulsive character in the story. So one of the early things that happens, it's not clear how old they are, but like teenagers or young adults. Esau is out like hunting, like being the wild man he is, and he comes home and Jacob's there with like a pot of like lentil stew, and Esau's like so hungry that he says, "I'll give you some of that stew, or else I'll die." And Jacob says, "Well, if you give me your birthright, then I'll let you have some." And Esau's like, "Yeah, whatever, just give me the stew." So he like sells his birthright as the firstborn for a pot of soup, which I reference in the poem, and then he later also loses his father's blessing. Jacob also kind of tricks him out of his father's blessing, and so then Jacob flees from Esau, and while he's on that journey, he has a couple of encounters with God. There's the famous story of Jacob's ladder, right, where he's sleeping. He has a dream of a ladder with angels ascending and descending from heaven, and then also when he's from on his way home to see Esau again many years later, there's this very strange account of how a man shows up at night and attacks him and wrestles with him all night long, and then and it turns out this person is God in some sense, um, and uh, and and he renames Jacob Israel, which means like the one who struggles with God. And
Mm.
then Jacob does return home, and he and and he asks Esau for his forgiveness. He says to him that seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, and Esau forgives him, and they reconcile. So that's the context. So it's this really rich story with all these layers to it, and there's sections of it which I don't think anyone's ever has been able to explain what it really means. Like the bit where like God attacks him and wrestles with him at night. Like that's it's so rich, but to hammer out a logical meaning from that, I don't know if you can.
Right.
Um, but but yeah, so it's spawned all kinds of versions of it. But there have been various sort of more narrow kind of theological takes on it. And the Jacob was loved, Esau was hated bit in the poem that is also from the scriptures that comes up later in the prophets, and it sometimes is applied in a very simplistic way to say like, oh, God chose Jacob and he to be like his vessel of good, and he chose Esau to be destroyed, and which I think is an overly simplistic reading. If you actually read the story, Esau is like he's kind of crazy and he's kind of impulsive, but he seems like he's deep down he's a good person who's really struggling, and he forgives his brother after being like very deeply wronged by him. So when I use the Jacob was loved, Esau was hated bit, that bit is a bit tongue in cheek for me in the poem.
Mm.
I don't think it's that black and white, but there is something there. There's something about how Esau kind of makes these rash decisions that kind of whittles away his inheritance, and Jacob, as much as he's kind of sneaky and a deceiver, he seems to be genuinely seeking an encounter with God, and I think God, in some sense, honors that.
Hmm. Interesting. And there's a lot to ponder. I mean, from some of the comments that I was reading or analyses, yeah, I mean, Jacob is more sort of urbane, right? He
Hmm.
lives in the tents, and he's more,
Yeah.
I guess you could associate with the city folk to a certain
Hmm.
extent. So he's more crafty, more cosmopolitan. And yeah, Esau is just more kind of, I don't want to say primitive or like
Russ,
earthy, but he's more country folk, more rough
Hmm.
around the edges. And so both, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? I mean, there are virtues and shortcomings for each character, but then yeah, each one is sort of struggling with certain things. And the story kind of lays out all of that, right? So depending on
Hmm.
who you are, the story might offer a different lesson simply by virtue of the fact that the person who's reading it is going to have to reflect on a different part of themselves, you know. But yeah,
Hmm.
Jacob does have a vision, right, of the
Hmm.
ladder and the ascension of angels. So there is something higher and metaphysical that they're still having glimpses of, or that's
Hmm.
introduced as a glimpse. Does he climb the ladder? No, he falls asleep on a rock, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like he never fully got there. Does anybody fully get there? That's another question, right? He
Yeah.
wrestles with God, but I mean, would the story really be more powerful? He just climbed it and got there, and I mean, would it have the same power and gusto as a story if it was just like, yeah, and then he climbed the ladder and he was with the angels, and yeah, probably not work as well.
Well, and the purpose God eventually chose him for was on Earth, right? It's like it was to sort of uh, to carry on that lineage that for Jewish people led to their inheritance of the land, and for Christians led to under the birth of Christ, right? Like it was a spiritual purpose, but it was a purpose on earth. He couldn't have 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 accomplished that sitting in the clouds.
What led you
And
to write this, Jesse?
um like it was I mostly write metrical and rhyming poetry, and a lot of my poems just start with a phrase that's jingling around my head
All
and
right. Yeah, I
jingling and
get
jingling,
that's
jingling.
kind of
It's like a shoe in a dryer that's like picking
often
up other
for me.
things.
Yeah, same way.
Yeah, but there's also an element that, like I mentioned, I was raised Baptist, and I think at the time taught a fairly simplistic way of seeing this story, and it's gotten more complex as I've gotten older and kind of reread it, and like you actually read it like just read what's there in the text and don't come in with like preconceptions. It's so rich and so varied, and there's so many different angles to it that it just opens up to you in new ways. And so I wanted to kind of respond to those kind of overly simplistic readings and hopefully kind of open it up a bit, maybe for other people as well, like at least for myself.
Interesting.
Well, I had a reading of this, and you can tell me if I missed the mark or not. With poetry, I think it's hard to. Um, well, I thought it was interesting you picked a villanelle because the key feature of the villanelle is the alternating between refrains, and we have the
Mm,
two, Jacob was loved and Esau was hated,
mm,
and you won't stop creating this world you've created. So in the first one, we kind of see a message of predestination. And yet
mm,
in the second one, we see a message of free will, of a world essentially being, it's still in formation. The world is
mm,
constantly being created, i.e., we have agency over our actions, and we have that interplay between them, and we reach the resolution at the end where both are valid in it. And I think, and that's kind of St. Paul has a reading of this story too, where he talks about
mm,
in Romans, he talks about Esau by the strict, if you had followed the strict bloodline, would have inherited. But
mm,
no, it was Jacob who ended up inheriting because of, his actions attributed to his faith.
mm,
And that's, the message is we're not strict, believe Christians are not strictly heirs of the blood, they're heirs by faith. And I think that's kind of maybe you didn't, maybe you had the letter to the Romans in mind, or maybe not, but that popped
mm.
into my head reading this.
Yeah, well, they like the immediate familiarity to me of the Jacob was loved, Esau was hated, is more from Romans. Like I think the actual line is from Ezekiel or one of the later prophets, and I've read St. Paul a lot more than I've read the prophets, some to my shame. So for sure, like that resonance was there in terms of like the what you're saying about free will versus predestination. Like absolutely, that's kind of insofar as I have a clear idea about this. I tend to hesitate to like pin down any poem ever. I think there's always more there than you can explain. But insofar as I understand this poem, it's in those terms. It's yeah, it's trying to break apart that simplistic binary between free will and predestination, and kind of showing how there's something else that's at work, just this like a creative energy in life that's unfolding all around us.
Yeah, no, that's very good, Jesse. And yeah, I think this is where poetry is useful, right?
Mm,
You're doing exactly what poetry sort of allows us to do. And before we started recording, we were just talking about the difficulty of somebody asks you your politics versus, and then you're like, but poetry is about transcending politics, which is, I think, a lot of what people want, right? They don't want to live in
mm,
a binary world. And the sort of kind of cultural and societal or political matrix that we're in always kind of wants to shove people back into the binary system and have people partake of the dialectic. But I think poetry is there to sort of transcend these false binaries or these false dualities and sort of take us to a higher ground where we can actually have a dialogue and discussion, as people that are wrestling with truth, right? Wrestling with God, where it's not so black and white, and we do need discernment. So we're not going to get that if we're just in who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, and we just go all tribal caveman forever and see what happens.
What better metaphor for the act of writing a poem than wrestling with the creator? I mean, literally wrestling, it's
right.
We're wrestling with whatever the creative spark, the music, you know what I mean? It's very, the poem literally encompasses that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm going to read a follow-up Jacob's Ladder poem as a sort of just to add to the dialogue here. Because your poem, again, it made me think of a poem by Dana Gioia. I have his 99 poems here. Lighting is not great, but so The Burning Ladder. And so that initially got me interested in the theme, which is why, again, having read your poem, I just became more interested and fascinated with the story. So I'll just read you guys this one, and it'll be a fun little compare and contrast. And, audience, our contributors, we can see what you guys think. So this one's called The Burning Ladder. It's the first poem in the collection of 99 poems. So that's significant, maybe. Jacob never climbed the ladder, burning in his dream. Sleep pressed him like a stone in the dust. And when he should have risen like a flame to join that choir, he was sick of traveling and closed his eyes to the seraphim ascending, unconscious of the impossible distances between their steps. Missed the mount, the brilliant ladder, slowly disappearing into the scattered light between the stars. Slept through it all, a stone upon a stone pillow, shivering. Gravity, always greater than desire. So this one is on specifically Jacob's vision. Also very memorable last line there. A nice little zinger. Gravity always greater than desire, right? So of course, Jacob has a kind of celestial or heavenly vision, but the world is fraught with all sorts of elements as well that can't be, their power can't be discounted as well. And in a sense, I think it's a nice inversion that often transcendence comes by embracing the limits, right? Whether if it's our mortality or the world, I think especially in our age, or the recent paradigm of, that's all the obsession with self-actualization and liberation and all that, as if you can just remove every obstacle for the manifestation of yourself. But finally, you find out that yourself is in many ways defined by the fact that you live in a world that has boundaries and limitations. And embracing those can be liberating as well, which doesn't seem like it's as popular a message these days. So I thought this was a fun little play that Dana also had on the theme. And it's a different kind of insight, right? Just to say that, the insights, like any good poem or, story, we can continue to draw from it.
That's what Jesse, was saying earlier about how his interpretation, there's more than one. And that's, again, what poetry does so well, is examines things from different angles.
Yeah, and the same is true of the scriptures, right? Like there's a reason so many people are writing poems about these stories. Is because these stories really invite poems. They're so dense and so layered, and it's and such a big part of the story is the flaws of these characters that nonetheless, like, God chooses to work through, um,
Hmm.
and and how, like, just constantly gathering in all the chaos towards a greater purpose.
That's a good point.
Well, that's an interesting point too. That's the same reason as why I think the Greek myths, the classical
Mhm.
myths, attract the same amount of continued
Yeah.
attention. Except, they're instead of humans, through whom this omnipresent, all-powerful, eternal God is working, they have gods with human characteristics and flaws, and it's a lot of the same um, issues at play, hubris and fatal flaws, and the interactions those have and the impact on the world.
Mhm.
Actually, Adam, that reminds me of something I wrote down in case it came up. But Stefan Mallarmé said, if the gods do nothing unseemly, then they are no longer gods at all. And like you were saying about the Greek gods, they were all too, their foibles, their personalities were quite vivid in
Right.
cases. But
Mhm.
I
That's
you may
actually not a bad. I mean, as will become clear, Stuart, your poem Moonjar, we recently featured that in this issue and online as well on the Chain Muse. Read us your poem, and we can, there we have a good number of stuff in the issue, and I think this is a nice
All
follow.
right, well, I can do that. I get my glasses on here. This is
And maybe
Moonjar.
just say something about a moon jar. Yeah.
Well, a Moonjar. Well, I was going to do that after I read the poem, but that's actually a good question. A Moonjar it's unique to Joseon Dynasty, Korea. There aren't that many original ones left. They're about this big usually. They were unadorned, normally unadorned, kind of whitish pots, not perfectly round. They were kind of rudely thrown, but more or less round, hence the name Moon Jar. And again, they were notable for being unadorned, and they were made for even a period of about less than 100 years, roughly from 1650 to 1750 in the Common Era. And at the time, the Phoenix Throne, as they call it, as the Korean throne was called, was largely being controlled by the Neo-Confucianists. And they wanted to return to more modest values. And so that's where these unadorned vases came from. Plus, they wanted more money to go into the coffers because especially the blue dye that went on more elaborate pottery was quite expensive.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the context of what a moon jar. Today they bring over $1 million at auction. You'll see them in Korean period dramas, and they're quite beautiful. They're quite stunning, I think. And the moon, obviously, would there even be poetry without the moon?
Right.
So without further ado, I will. And speaking of the Neo-Confucianists, you also had the Buddhist faction at court and the Taoist faction. So that
Complicates things.
yes, it does. So I will go ahead and read it. It is glimpsed as if through a silken gauze, dimly lit by some hermit light within, a veiled spirit immune to earthly laws. Rude imperfections royally proclaimed, born of milky earth and eccentric spins, yin and yang halves joined as one, then inflamed. A white peacock, it disdains vain displays in favor of a hidden inner fire which rewards only the most patient gaze. Its surface pocked by stuffs from far stars, foundation shook by political gyres, yet its austere indifference nothing jars. The touch of its creator still impressed, it presents a face searching yet composed, as though by a lover's fingers caressed. Stellar detritus born of blaze and rhyme assumes a rare shape serenely reposed, a scholar's stone in the garden of time. So to explain a little more how this came to, most, I'm always intrigued by what makes someone sit down and write a particular poem. In this case, my daughter and I watch a lot of K-dramas together, and we have lots of Korean friends. We love Korean food, but I became friends. The idea for this came when I kind of became friends with a woman I train in jujitsu with, and her daughter, and we have a lot of things in common. Her daughter, she's raising an Asian daughter. My daughter's Asian. We discovered we had a lot of things in common. And I happened to meet her parents at the award ceremony, which we have twice a year at the place where I train in jiu-jitsu and judo.
Dojo.
Yes. And so somehow this idea just came to mind. And how they make moon jars is they throw two halves and then join them together. Well, her mother's from Korea originally. Her father was a GI, American GI, so that's where the yin and yang halves come from. That represents them. The political gyres refers to the various factions at court, the Neo-Confucians, the Taoists, and the Buddhists, and the probably unforgivable pun, nothing jars. Well, it is kind of it's unadorned in a jar. It has nothing inside it normally. It's a very Buddhist concept, which, I don't know, it's funny that you also published a poem I wrote about. It's called The White Peacock. And it's more or less coincidental, but it made sense in this context that the Neo-Confucius at court, they didn't want vain displays. They wanted to stress a more humble, and a white peacock is, lacks all the iridescent colors of its fellows.
Right. No, and I mean, it's beautifully written, and a scholar's stone in the garden of time, right? All your lines are very much, this is a good history lesson, right? When one digs into it. And obviously, I mean, one could go into Asian and Chinese politics for a while with a poem like this. But no, it's very beautiful, Stuart. Moonjar, I mean, again, even on its own, without all the history,
that's typically how I find many of my poems come from. Well, like Jesse said earlier, sometimes a line just pop. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up and usually it's a 10-syllable line will pop into my head. In this instance, it was my friend inspired it, but it also usually involves something not even necessarily related, other than the fact that her mother's from Korea, but somehow, and when I think a moon jar to me is one of the most, it's very uniquely Korean. It kind of describes Korea. Korea is a peninsular, it's called the Hermit Kingdom, and very isolated, and a moon jar kind of depicts there's a sense of isolation and even desolation about it. It's priceless, but when they were made, they were very humble and very unostentatious, and yet they're just serenely beautiful if you see one.
Mm.
If I could jump in, I love the opening of the poem. You know, we're told to not to write in passive voice, that it's not good style, but it is glimpsed, I think, frames the poem perfectly because the focus isn't on me or you or whoever's doing the viewing, it's on the object itself. And I think that emphasizes the humility and dare I say, the Buddhist outlook you cite in the phrase "nothing jars." So it was a great opening.
Well, thank you. You really hit it on. It's that sense of isolation and desolation, you know, in Chinese and Korean art, quite often, if there is a human figure, it's very incidental to the whole thing. And that's kind of what I was trying to convey. We come and go, political factions, and but the stuff that went into the making of this moon jar, it came millions and billions of years ago from the Big Bang, and just you really hit the nail on the head, I think.
No, it's very clear, and we published quite a few of your poems in this issue. I mean, so yeah, we'll link to the other ones that are online. But yeah, you have a lot of really beautiful and well informed and poems that they're all they're good conversation pieces. Let's put it that way. So that's good. And unless anybody has anything else, just to keep it, last time we were, if we want to cover some stuff, just to keep a good pace. Adam, you mentioned Bagatelle, which is another fine poem we have by Tom Merrill.
Sure. Yeah, what attracted me was the title. If you if you have a musical background, a bagatelle is a short piece. In fact, I think literally it comes from the French for like something you throw away.
Huh.
Like and Beethoven wrote a few famous one. If you ever want to listen, the Opus 126 Bagatelles, which is funny because Opus 125 is the Ninth Symphony. So right after that, you have this set of six short piano pieces. They're short and they're delightful to play. I can play all six of them, but they're quite deep for their brevity. And so when I saw it, I thought, oh, it immediately thoughts of the musical associations drew, but it's a poem I wanted to share because it's interesting. So Bagatelle 1. And then there's an epigraph. Man hands on misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf. From P.L. If brute nature's too strong for arresting in its drive to keep planting new seed, the result so cries out for protesting. No lost cause seems more worthy to plead. It concerns those at risk of induction into the ills we all suffer and mourn, and the facing of grief and destruction for no reason but having been born. It commends sparing others diseases, and anger and fear and despair, and such mercies as flow from sweet Jesus, and the hopelessness driving all prayer.
I mean, that's good. I mean, it's got some bite.
Like I said, I think we were discussing before we started recording that Bagatelle was one poem I considered reading from this issue of the journal.
Yeah, so it stands out to people. And I mean, Tom has a whole philosophy here. I think it would be fairly accurate. He admires Schopenhauer, and I mean, he's a bit of a Tom is a Schopenhauerian poet, if you will. And so, he describes nature as fairly brutal. And Adam, you wrote it, you know something about this as well, right? So Schopenhauer believed that, yeah, nature and life could be fairly brutal. And that's why having a sort of aesthetic consciousness and asceticism, things to sort of tame the brutality of the world in a kind of like secular Christian way, I guess you could say, right? There's kind of that thing going on. And here, Tom sort of even, he doubles down though on this, that as a lot of his poems, yeah, I've spoken with him, so I know that this is kind of how he thinks about it. But he thinks nature is quite, you could say, evil, right? And so, what does man do against this thing that just wants to keep perpetuating itself? It gets fairly dark, but it's interesting, and the insights that he generates as he's wrestling with this paradox of nature, right? Which, you have the spiritual man and the natural man. I mean, that's always a discussion that comes up here. Most recently was the Mormon kids at one of the corners in my place that were bringing that up to me. I like to have fun with them. We chat uh, but yeah, any thoughts, you guys? And it's a great poem. Tom is a top-notch poet.
Yeah, he really is very good.
Simplicity, right? He has the prose, the vernacular is, there's nothing overwrought, and yet it's beautiful and elegant, and there's a clarity, right, that I think is refreshing. You don't have to be super enigmatic and or do all sorts of intricate things to get at something deeply and clearly. So he does that very well, and musically, with form, which only helps, I'd say.
His another poem of his in the journal Pro Forma, I really enjoyed a lot. He's really interesting. I just recently read by Huysmans Au Rebord, which is sometimes translated as Against Nature, and there's basically just one character, and the guy's kind of anti-natural. This was kind of a Bible of the decadence movement, and the guy revels in artificiality, and it's kind of ironic to me what you said about Tom, because his writing is very natural. I mean, it's very smooth and natural. There's nothing studied or artificial about it.
Yeah, and at that level alone, right, I think that there's such great virtue in that whatever issues or however people want to interpret it, just at that level, there most of Tom's poems are, they are teaching moments. So yeah, it's very refreshing.
Funny you mentioned that. I have a copy right here.
Very good.
What is that another is that a French existentialist writer,
Decadent writer,
Okay.
a symbolist, late 19th century.
That's kind of a manifesto of sorts for the decadence movement. And so when you were describing Tom's outlook, David, I immediately thought of that.
Right. Ironically, he gets a lot of his ideas from the French, yeah, or Germans. Just you mentioned pro forma. I mean, this is in the issue. I can just read it just to share for people. So Tom Merrill's pro forma also in the issue reads, "The season is changing, I notice, the warm giving way to the cold. We're nearing the winter solstice when night takes swiftest hold. Which way the weather is turning, there once was reason to care. Now that I dread each returning, I'd rather remain unaware. Sleep is the aim of my days now, neither to sense nor to know. A land stripped bare to the bow will suffice is a place to go.
I love that last stanza. Oh boy,
Pro
that's so
forma, interesting title as well.
Mhm.
very good. I really like
think
that.
that's I think that's even darker than Bagatelle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well,
Yeah.
it gets even darker. So we have to take those in doses, but all the
Yeah,
more.
but the content like verges on nihilism, but the form runs contrary to that in such an interesting
Exactly,
way.
exactly.
It's
It's
like
fascinating.
it's so beautiful,
It's
right? Like those
fascinating.
um like that slant rhyme of notice and solstice is so great. In the first one, I was really struck by the placement of Jesus in it, like as a rhyme for diseases. It's like he's like undermining the place of Jesus in the poem as much as he can, but he's still there. Like and there's it's a really interesting moment of tension in that poem
Yeah.
Well, and
where
that comes right before the final line, which I think
yeah
is
yeah yeah
magnificent. The
Yeah.
hopelessness driving all
yeah
prayer. It's hopeless, but we still pray.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah
yeah, no. Kudos to Tom. Whatever his intentions. I mean,
Good
yeah,
stuff.
we
Good stuff.
congratulate you on some good poems. So I mean,
Mhm.
and look, we don't have to. We could go on for a while. There's a lot here, but maybe we could read. How are we doing for time here? 8, 9, 10. Yeah, okay. Maybe we could read.
I,
If
I
people,
was going to read a short translation by Adam Birch because
Michael Birch. Yeah.
Michael Birch, I'm sorry, because Adam in our last chat we got into it towards the end, I believe, Adam, when about how some of the archaeological discoveries of pertaining to ancient Egypt about the daily lives of the people there and how that squares with the our view of the Egyptian pantheon and everything, and how and the theme is history, for the journal.
Yeah, I should have probably said more about that. Yeah,
And
good that you're
well,
doing that, Stuart.
but it's interesting how, and I just finished Roberto Colasso's Literature and the Gods, and he said he talks about absolute literature, which we kind of the highest form, and he says the highest form of absolute literature is mythology, and it's kind of interesting that based on what Adam was saying in the earlier the first half of this chat, which now people have to go back and hear what Adam said in our first chat. It seems like to me, mythology and history are like looking at each other. It's like a distorted, there's a distortion between the two, and yet one can't exist without the other. You need them. And somehow that distortion, I think, is maybe where poetry comes from.
Hmm.
But
We should probably say, yeah, Adam, we have an essay you wrote about Egypt and its enduring legacy, and I mean, our issue has an Egyptian theme, which I think we treat. And again, it's hard to do something like this justice, given we talk about a lot of things, the origins of the Egyptian mysteries, Moses's mission and intervening on a corrupt, Egyptian priestly class, and sort of retooling or recapturing the essence of the original mysteries in order to basically bring a new revelation that would kind of take people out of their, or lead the Jews out of their servitude, let's say, to start. And so, yeah, Egypt has taken on all sorts of mythical meanings, right? In recent times, I mean, I see this all the time. I write polemics about this. But like, people associate Egypt with kind of like lost wisdom and like aliens and all sorts of things, which is very popular these days. They have talk about like aliens and like mainstream media, which I think should be weird for anyone. Like, what are they talking about? But yeah, so this idea of like lost knowledge, you can do a lot with that, right? It's not going away. There is people's fascination with the mysterious. Um, yeah, and so Egypt has played a big role in that in Western culture, right? In general.
And Egypt exemplifies that more than anything. 250 years ago, we knew next to nothing about it beyond what was in the Bible or what garbled accounts from Herodotus and some other classical authors.
Mhm.
And then, in the space of a century, we the language was deciphered. We a whole history, culture, religion, literature, poetry, it all opened up after having been literally forgotten and unknown for 15 centuries at least.
Frozen
Uh,
in time.
yeah, so Egypt is lost knowledge, and so the question always arises, what else is out there that they knew about that's being hidden, and among the ancient Greeks, if you read, Plato's account of Atlantis supposedly came from an Egyptian priest, and Herodotus talks about all sorts of medicinal and astronomical knowledge that the Egyptians had that put the Greeks at the time to shame. So there's always the question of what was lost and what's out there waiting to be discovered.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what the point of the essay was to describe how this, world resurfaced and is now very much a part of our contemporary culture.
Yeah, in strange and interesting ways. And at the same time as I hear that, it's like people are so fascinated with lost knowledge that are they sort of paying attention to everything that we could lose today, right? If they don't, if Western civilization doesn't kind of smarten up. So it's a bit of an irony if you're fascinated with lost knowledge from thousands of years ago when, if you lose a lot of the knowledge that we have today, right? I mean, I don't know that the Egyptians have sort of whether it's like nuclear power or rockets or the kind of surgical or related medicinal things that we have, and when you see a kind of economy and its industrial base dwindle and financial bubbles, and you're like, wow, is this? Are we going to like be able to maintain all this if we kind of lose the basis to keep our society working. So that's another irony, I think, for people who are so interested with lost knowledge. But like we were saying at the beginning, we can play with these depending on how the artist chooses to treat the theme, right? You can flesh out a lot of different insights. And that's probably the most for me, that's the most important takeaway is that we should be trying to flesh out insights. And we can't do that unless we have some kind of relationship with the poetical where we can play around with a theme and explore it, just as you described, Jesse, where it's just the kind of shoe dinging around in the dryer. But if you're paying attention and you follow up on these dings and these echoes, yeah, there might actually be something there. So curiosity is crucial, and imagination. Stuart, did you say there was a short translation you wanted to read?
There was by Michael Birch, and I was sort of struck in relation to Tom Merrill's Pro Forma.
Okay.
These are, I'm just going to read one. It's quite short, but it's from Michael Birch's loose translation / interpretation of Harper's songs, which were found in the tomb of a is he a priest? Yeah, a priest named Neferhotep. And I will read number 2. Death abhors violence. No man there arms himself against his brother. No one rebels in that peaceful kingdom. All our ancestors rest there since man's earliest days. The multitudes assemble there, every one, for none may tarry overlong in the land of Egypt. There is no one who will not cross over. So this was in a harpist song. There were 3 of them found in the tomb of this one priest. Just fascinating to me. And I thought of this again in relation to what Adam was talking about towards the end of our last chat.
And all the lines are beautiful for these poems. I mean, they're quite astonishing and refreshing, right? These are very old poems, and yet their wisdom seems eternally fresh, right? The last one reads, "Earth life is no more than the span of a dream, but fair welcomes are given when one reaches the West." Very nice.
Good stuff.
And I mean, the irony is, right, the irony I think that you pointed out, Adam, was that, we think of the Egyptians and, okay, so there's this fascination with mummies and tombs and death, but what they were really fascinated with was life, right? And part of celebrating life, right, is you have to sort of recognize the mortal aspects of any individual life, right? Whether that means your identity is, you're not just thinking about your individual life since it's mortal, or whether you are just reminding yourself to not take anything too seriously to the point that you fail to savor or appreciate what life does offer.
Well, that's exactly what the poem Stuart read says. What are you fighting about? Where we're all going to the afterlife and nobody fights there. So what's the point of all this here?
Yeah, and I don't think that's a bad note, actually, to conclude our talk on.
Yeah.
We've again, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. If people should get the issue, we have a new documentary coming out. We recently put out our Reclaiming the Mysteries documentary. For anybody who hasn't seen it, check that out. So we are making movies now. Yes. And we're expanding all our initiatives. So getting the journal is also just the way that people can support, if they just...
Documentary was very well done, David. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's starting to get some views, and I think in short order, we'll have a pretty mean and lean media machine. And so, but what makes that possible is actually having talented contributors so that I can kind of worry about all these back office things and productions and just like, okay, let's run another good poem in the meantime. So guys, it was a pleasure to have you all on. Thank you, Stuart, Jesse, Adam. Jesse, so plug your book, right? Again, so anybody who wants to, beautiful collection. I've read many of the poems in the issue. The Living Law.
Yeah, The Living Law, published by Darkly Bright Press 2024. Jesse Keith Butler.
Yeah, we're gonna link to that as well.
Thanks.
And so all your works, Adam and Stuart, appear in the latest issue. So anybody who wants to read more, thank you everybody for joining us.
It's a pleasure to chat with such interesting people and like minds, and I look forward to doing more of it.
Absolutely. And we have a lot more coming, trust me. So thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back again shortly.